What is up, everybody? This is your boy, Teran Rodriguez, bringing you another edition of Set Point. It is NCAA tournament time as the men's and women's basketball tournaments have ended, but the women's volleyball tournament is about to begin next week as I will break down the 48-team bracket. Which team made it, which team didn't, and what are the key matchups for the first round. Also, we had a dramatic NCAA men's volleyball series between Long Beach State and Hawaii. There were thunderous kills, amazing blocks at the net, super hot service aces, and lots of loud noise. Did that come into play, though? Also, we have a lot of shuffling going on in terms of the NCAA beach rankings. There's a new number one team, by the way, as it's not USC and it's not Florida State. Who is the new number one team in the NCAA beach volleyball scene? You'll have to find out a little bit later. Also, we got a little bit of a surprise for the latter part of the show. What's it going to be? You'll have to find out on Set Point. This is Teran Rodriguez bringing you another edition of Set Point here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports. And welcome one, welcome all to another edition of Set Point. I'm actually going to take myself a quick little commercial break. I know it's all of a sudden, but we will be right back after this. You're listening to Set Point here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports.
Hey guys, it's Blake Henley, better known as H-Town Blake to some of you. Happy to announce that Bases Loaded is back in full force. We'll be bringing that high heat every Tuesday night here on IE Sports Radio. So come home, get ready, dig into that batter's box, and see if you can chase that high heat, baby. So we'll be coming to you live with all the stats, all the rundowns, all the division rivalries, and every team that's going to make the playoff push to get to that one and only October and get to the pinnacle of what baseball is, to hoist that Commissioner's Trophy when it's all said and done.
What's good, fight fans? It's your boy, Marcus Los Great, here to give you what you want, here to give you what you need. Yeah, man. Yeah. I'm coming to you live, straight from your mama's basement with a crispy, awesome white tea. They are coming to you live every Tuesday at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Powered by IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports.
That's right, everybody. You could check out all of those amazing shows here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that sports. So we are back here. Apologies once again for the quick break. I just had a little bit of a technical issue, but it is sorted out, and we are back with Set Point, and we are ready to go. So last weekend, the NCAA women's volleyball season in terms of the regular season came to a close. All of the automatic qualifiers have been clinched. Your teams that have punched their tickets into the NCAA tournament are UMBC, UCF, Louisville, Lipscomb, Dayton, Creighton, Weber State, High Point, Wisconsin, Texas, Towson, Western Kentucky, Wright State, Rider, Bowling Green, North Carolina A&T, Illinois State, UNLV, Long Island, Morehead State, Washington, Army West Point, Kentucky, Samford, Texas A&M CC, Jackson State, South Dakota, Texas State, Utah Valley, and last but not least, BYU. So those are your teams that have automatically qualified for the playoffs or the NCAA tournament because they won their conference or their conference tournament. Let's give a round of applause for these teams. But that's just only 30 teams. The tournament field is a 48-team bracket, and then there's still 18 more spots to go in terms of at-large bids. So we still need to go over those, the teams that made the NCAA tournament as an at-large team. So the 18 at-large teams that made the NCAA tournament are, this is in no particular order, by the way. The only thing that's going to be in particular order is the last four in, and that's also not going to be in particular order. So the 18 at-large teams that made the NCAA tournament are Minnesota, Nebraska, Florida, Purdue, Baylor, Ohio State, Penn State, Utah, Washington State, Oregon, UCLA, Pitt, Pepperdine, Rice, and your last four in, Notre Dame, San Diego, Georgia Tech, and Missouri. So those are your 18 teams that have made the NCAA tournament, and they will be duking it out for the NCAA championship. So let's give a round of applause for these 18 teams that have made the NCAA tournament. So, unfortunately, there is still the last four teams, or the first four teams out. And the first four teams out of the NCAA tournament are Kansas State, and this is in no particular order. Kansas State, Arkansas, Tennessee, and the last team that was actually left out of the NCAA tournament is... I'm making this more dramatic than I need to be. I actually don't remember the Marquette. Marquette was the last one. I actually predicted the first four out would be Tennessee, Arkansas, North Carolina, and Florida State. Apparently, Florida State got no better than fifth in terms of the first four out, the teams that were left out of the NCAA tournament. So that is quite disappointing when it comes to Florida State, but they didn't really have too many standout wins. Kansas State at least did decent in their conference. The problem was they also did not have any standout wins. So there's that right there. And then Tennessee and Arkansas had showed a lot of improvement, but the problem was they also didn't have any standout wins. I think their only true moral victory was that they took Missouri to 5, which that still isn't that great. So I can understand that. Tennessee, I wasn't too surprised when they didn't make the NCAA tournament, considering that they also struggled in terms of the SEC. I think they finished like 12-10 or 12-8. They did have 2 wins over Missouri, but that wasn't enough to get them in. And they did take a set off of Kentucky, but that also wasn't enough to get them in. their wins over Missouri were basically their true standout wins. They also had losses to like other teams such as Alabama, which they should have won that. They lost to Georgia, which they probably should have won that. And then they also lost to Arkansas, which Arkansas is improved, but I'll also say this, that if Tennessee does beat those three teams that I mentioned, Georgia, Alabama, and Arkansas, they get into the NCAA tournament, and I think Missouri gets left out of it. That's because Missouri has been just as disappointing, and there's a reason why Missouri was the last four in. Had Missouri finished with a worse record than Tennessee, I think Tennessee gets in. So it's unfortunate that Tennessee got left out, and I feel bad for my boy Seth Eves. But you got to win the matches that truly count, especially against the teams that are subpar. So tough luck for Tennessee and Arkansas and Kansas State and Marquette. Marquette was kind of an interesting scenario. I think they beat Creighton in a non-conference game, which was eventually up to a conference game, but they lost in the finals of the Big East tournament, which really cost them. Like, I think if Marquette had beaten Creighton and Marquette would have gotten in. But it's unfortunate. I think Creighton would have been borderline of first four out or last four in. It all depends on what the committee sees in Creighton and Missouri. But that is it right there for all the teams that made it. So now it is NCAA tournament time as we say what up, doe to Marcus Losgreat, who just popped in the chat room. Marcus will be going on in T-minus 1 hour and 45 minutes. But hey, who's counting? But definitely do check out Marcus Losgreat's show, Gloves Off, at 8 p.m. Pacific Time, 11 p.m. Eastern Time. I appreciate you for popping in the chat room, Marcus. It really means a lot. Now let's go over the NCAA tournament bracket. So it's a 48-team bracket, and I'm just going to go on a little bit of a tirade here. I don't like the 48-team bracket. This is Tennessee, Arkansas, Marquette, and Kansas State are probably wishing this tournament bracket was the standard 64-team bracket and not the 48-team bracket for this year, which it really sucks. And lots of coaches have complained about, such as, I believe, Kelly Sheffield of Wisconsin complained about it. John Cook wasn't too happy. And then multiple coaches don't like it. And the worst part is, for this year, there's not going to be an NIVC. In other words, that's the volleyball equivalent of the National Invitational Tournament, which it really sucks. And I guess everyone just did not want to have like a 16 or 8-team tournament just to determine a winner for like a participation trophy. But it is what it is. And also, for those that don't know, the reason why there are not 32 automatic qualifiers and there's 30 is because that the Big West Conference and Ivy League both canceled their volleyball seasons. Like, the Ivy League canceled their sports season altogether, while the Big West Conference canceled their fall sports season, which included women's volleyball, which was absolutely, I don't think that was a good move, considering I think they jumped the gun a little. I think they should have waited and seen, but I just think that it was just not a good move. It really sucks. I'm not just saying that because I am a Long Beach State student, but I was really looking forward to seeing what the Big West Conference can do. Everyone was confused when they all saw Hawaii was in the top 25 in terms of the preseason polls. And I think they were in the top 25 in terms of the week 1 polls. But everyone found out, oh wait, Hawaii is not playing this season, so we got to take them out. So it really sucks, because I was looking forward to seeing Hawaii and, heck, UC Santa Barbara and Long Beach State, and then, heck, even Cal Poly, but unfortunately that was not the case. And I would have liked to have seen some of those teams like play in different conferences this season. Like, it would have been cool to see Hawaii in the Pac-12, or like Santa Barbara or Long Beach State in the West Coast Conference, or a team in the Western Athletic Conference or the Mountain West Conference. But that is not the case, and we won't be able to see some of those teams in the NCAA tournament. Hopefully, we'll be able to get them back next year. We should be able to get them back, get both those conferences back next season. So it is what it is. And Marcus says, or GCU, but GCU's in the Western Athletic Conference, which I'm probably presuming that he's bummed that he didn't get to see GCU in the NCAA tournament. Hopefully they do get to make the NCAA tournament. Utah Valley won the Western Athletic Conference. I think Utah Valley was chosen 5th in that conference, which I was going to find all the coaches' polls from every conference, but I think that would have taken too much time. And I don't want to take up the time because I only have until 8 p.m. my time for when Marcus Losgreat goes on. So there's that. Now let's go over the NCAA tournament. So the tournament goes as follows. So your top 16 teams. Let's go 16 through 10. So the number 16 seed is BYU. The 15th seed is Washington State. The 14th seed is Utah. The 13th seed is Penn State. The 12th seed is Baylor. The 11th seed is Louisville. And the 10th seed is Oregon. Now let's go 9 through 6. The number 9 seed is Ohio State. The number 8 seed is Florida. The number 7 seed is Purdue. And the number 6 seed is Nebraska. Now let's go... Number 6 seed is Washington. Now let's go 5 through 1. Number 5 seed is Nebraska. Number 4 seed is Texas. Number 3 seed is Minnesota. Number 2 seed is Kentucky. And the number 1 overall seed in the NCAA tournament this year is Wisconsin. So those are your top 16 seeds. So basically, those 16 teams that I just mentioned will have a first round bye. They're automatically into the second round because, again, it's a 48-team tournament. And, again, I really don't like the new format. I like the traditional 64-team tournament. As we say hello to Davidson Crooks, he says, "What's good?" Hey, what's good, brother? But I just think it's just rather weird. I get the NCAA tournament had to pull some strings when it came to the NCAA tournament, but again, I'd rather see the traditional 64 team. Like basketball had 64 teams, and so did women's basketball, but volleyball only gets 48, which again that hurts Tennessee, Arkansas, Kansas State, and Marquette, and it hurts all the other teams that actually had a solid season as well. And I basically talked about this early in the season that basically every team had to pretty much play perfect. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to make the NCAA tournament. And with no NIVC, all those teams who have a good amount of seniors or a decent amount of seniors on their team basically won't be able to participate in any sort of postseason. So it sucks, but it's only for this year, so luckily, we shouldn't have this next season. Because everything is starting to, improve, which is great. So, and by the way, this whole NCAA tournament is being taken place in Omaha. There is no home court advantage, and there is no, regional tournaments. Everything is being taken place in Omaha, Nebraska. So there's that. So Wisconsin's not going to get is not going to have home court advantage, and neither will all the other seeded teams. Which, again, it's a bummer, but they have to do what they have to do. Basketball did it with the men in Indiana, and then for the women, they did it in San Antonio. So I think we could all live with another bubble playoffs or a bubble postseason. Either way, you get what I mean. All right, so now let's go over the first round matchups. So the first round matchups for every region. So we'll start with the upper left portion of the region. So the first round matchups include Bowling Green versus Weber State, Rider versus UCLA, Missouri versus South Dakota, Morehead State versus Creighton. Sorry. But the noteworthy matchup of that region, the upper left region, is Missouri versus South Dakota. Missouri has not proven themselves this year. They have 0 standout wins, and they're facing a South Dakota team that got in a couple of non-conference games, and they managed to win the Summit League, which was very impressive. I didn't think South Dakota actually stood a chance. I thought they were going to lose in the first round or the semifinals to Kansas City, but they actually pulled it off. They beat Kansas City in the semifinals in 5 sets, and then they beat Denver in the finals in 5 sets. They were actually down 2-0 to Denver, and then they managed to pull it out in 5 sets. So there's that right there. So anyway, my picks for the first round matchup in the upper left portion is Bowling Green, UCLA, South Dakota, and Creighton. South Dakota, to me, I think has really peaked. They really struggled in the second to last week of the regular season, but I think they've picked up steam. I think they're riding a whole lot of momentum. Missouri, to me, I just don't think has that it factor. They have Kylie DeBerg, who is one of the better players in the SEC, but I just don't think Missouri gets out of the first round. They're just inconsistent. South Dakota at least has lost to some decently good teams. And honestly, I think South Dakota kind of got a little jobbed when it came to the Summit League Championship, because their second game against... They were supposed to play a second game against Denver, but it got canceled, not because of COVID, but because of bad weather in Denver, Colorado. So, had South Dakota had beaten Denver a second time, Kansas City, South Dakota, and Denver would have been regular season Summit League champions. So there's that right there. And I like Denver's story. Like, a team that was actually the heavy favorite to win the Summit League, but then they finished third, but managed to beat Kansas City and Denver in 5-set matches, is rather impressive. So that's why I like South Dakota in this matchup against Missouri. And then UCLA against Rider, that goes without saying. UCLA has been heavily battle-tested. Even when they had matches where they should have won and wound up losing, they managed to beat some noteworthy teams like Oregon, Washington State, and Washington. And they also beat Utah, too. So I think UCLA is going to definitely beat Rider. Bowling Green and Weber State. Okay, so both of those teams won their conference. The thing about that was basically a pick'em match right there. Like, Bowling Green comes into this tournament 22-1, while Weber State is 18-1. To me, that one is rather the trickiest matchup ever. But I will say this: I think it's going to go 5. I just think Bowling Green has a good chance. Bowling Green, based off of matches, quantitative matches, is going to be battle tested. And the good thing is that they're not undefeated. Like, if they were undefeated, I probably would have gone Weber State. But it is what it is. So that's pretty much the top left portion of the NCAA tournament bracket. Let's go to the bottom left portion of the tournament bracket. So the first round matchups of the bottom left portion of the tournament bracket is Texas State versus Utah Valley, UMBC versus Pepperdine, Rice versus North Carolina A&T, and then Samford versus Wright State. There are a lot of interesting matchups in this first round region. Like, I kind of had a tough time picking one. I picked UMBC versus Pepperdine just because I like UMBC's story. This is actually the first time they've made the NCAA tournament in a while. And by while, I mean it's been way too long since they last made the NCAA tournament. Pepperdine, on the other hand, has made the NCAA tournament for the second time in 3 years, and they look very impressive. Like, if there's one team to watch for in this bracket that's not seeded, it's Pepperdine. They really have a lot of options, and offensively and defensively. Like, their conference just announced that Meg Brown was named Freshman of the Year, and then Maddie Shields was named libero of the year. And they have a lot of talent on their team in terms of firepower, such as Rachel Ahearns and Shannon Scully. And then they have a sophomore setter, which knows her stuff as well. So that's why I have Pepperdine as my team to watch for in that region. But as for the matchups, I picked Texas State over Utah Valley just because Texas State has had a lot of chances. Really came alive in the last part of the regular season. They actually beat Baylor in 4 sets, which really surprised me. I didn't think Texas State stood a chance against Baylor, but they actually beat them, and that's darn good. I am very impressed because Texas State is the winner of the Sun Belt Conference Tournament. And I think even if Texas State didn't win the Sun Belt Conference Tournament, that win over Baylor would have probably got them in anyway. So that's good stuff for Texas State, and they're doing well in the post-Karen Cheeseum era. Utah Valley is kind of going to have a tough time. I mean, it's been a while since Utah Valley won an NCAA tournament game. So we'll see. And then Pepperdine I have beating UMBC. I like UMBC's story, but Pepperdine just has too much firepower. I have Rice over North Carolina A&T just because they did finish as the runner-up in the Conference USA tournament, but they do have that big win over Texas. They beat Texas at Texas. And this is actually the second straight season Rice has knocked off Texas, and it's darn impressive. And they also went 5 with Baylor, so if there's one team that no one wants to face, it's probably Rice. And believe it or not, Rice is actually on the same bracket as Texas. And if Rice plays their cards right, they could get a rematch with the Longhorns. If Rice actually gets out of the first round, they'd face Penn State. And I actually like Rice's chances of winning that match, even though I'm looking too far ahead. But I like Rice's chances of winning that, considering Penn State is super young. They haven't had a full, consistent schedule of games. They were lucky to have... They're kind of fortunate to be in a Power 5 conference and to have that one win over Purdue. Otherwise, I don't see how Penn State would be a seeded team, because Penn State was lucky, in my opinion, to get the 13th seed. So even at 9-5, I think Penn State is the only single win team to be a seed in this tournament. Yeah, they're the only team with fewer than 10 wins to be seeded in this tournament. So, crazy times. Many could probably say that UCLA deserves a seed over Penn State, but UCLA has kind of lost to some teams that they probably should have beaten. At least Penn State's losses were to legit teams. Unfortunately, they didn't finish their entire schedule. Their series against Nebraska and their series against Wisconsin also got canceled, which really sucks. I was literally looking forward to that Wisconsin/Nebraska series against Penn State, but what can we do? My only hope is that Penn State doesn't have any traces of COVID and whatnot, because if they do, then they will be ineligible to participate in the NCAA tournament, and they may either be replaced or they may lose their first round bye. And if that's the case, then what would they do in that situation? Would they put Rice or whoever wins between Rice/North Carolina A&T into the Sweet 16? Or would they just replace Penn State with probably Kansas State or any of the first 4 teams that are out? I don't know. I'm not going too technical. But it just is food for thought right there. Anyway, so the last matchup of the bottom left portion of the bracket is Samford versus Wright State. Again, I don't know too much about these two teams. I know for a fact the conference that Wright State plays in is a pretty strong, underrated conference. They have teams like Milwaukee and I believe Oakland in that conference, and every night is pretty much a battle on a traditional season. But Wright State making it out of the of their conference. I actually am blanking on their name, but on the conference name, but Wright State making it out of their conference is very promising, especially since they won the conference tournament. So there's that right there. So that's why I picked Wright State, and that's why I have them going to the second round. So now let's jump to the upper right corner of the NCAA tournament bracket. So the first round matchups of the upper right portion of the bracket includes Georgia Tech versus Lipscomb, LIU versus Pitt, San Diego versus A&M Corpus Christian, or Texas A&M Corpus Christian, and Towson versus Dayton. So there are a lot of noteworthy matchups in this bracket, primarily with the first two matchups. So let's go to Georgia Tech and Lipscomb. So Georgia Tech has the impressive record of 13-4, and they finished they pretty much finished near the top of the ACC. The problem is that Georgia Tech has 0 standout wins. All of their losses were to legit teams, minus Miami. They lost to Louisville, straight sets. They lost to Notre Dame, straight sets. They lost to Pitt, straight sets. They don't have one standout win. I'll give Georgia Tech this. They don't have any losses to bad teams other than Miami, and Miami was actually pretty decent. They actually finished in, I want to say, in like the top 5, top 6 of the ACC. But I will also say this about Georgia Tech. They do have some really good players like Mariana Brambilla and oh god, I'm blanking on her name. I'm blanking on the very talented player of. Either way, you get what I mean. Georgia Tech has some really talented players on their team, and I believe her first name is like Julia Bergman. That's her name. Julia Bergman, and she's only a sophomore, and she really does well in terms of blocking the ball, and she does well in terms of hitting the ball and digging the ball as well. So she's one of those 5-tool players that really is impressive. And then Maddie McKissock is a floor general when it comes to assists. She's kind of like the quarterback of the team. She has the most toughest part of the offense, and that's basically to like set the ball perfectly. And she's actually tied for 9th in career assists, and soon she's going to be all alone in 9th place when it comes to career assists. So there's that right there. But Georgia Tech, I have them beating Lipscomb. I think it's going to be closer than expected. I think Lipscomb is going to make them work for that win, and if Georgia Tech isn't careful, they could get bounced in the first round. Remember, Georgia Tech was the team that won the NIVC last year. This time they're facing a whole different animal. They're facing a lot of good teams, and if they get out of the first round, which hopefully they do, they will face a very tough Minnesota team, which that team's been very battle-tested this year. Their only 2 losses were to Wisconsin, which nobody was really beating, and Nebraska, which they didn't have one of their better players. So there's that. Second matchup to watch for is LIU versus Pitt. Now, here's the thing for Pitt. Pitt has had probably the biggest ups and downs of all the ACC teams. In the fall, Pitt was 4-4, which was absolutely unacceptable. They lost twice to Syracuse. They lost once to Notre Dame after they had a 2-0 lead, and they had 2 match points. And then they lost to Louisville at home, which was actually their first home loss since, I think, 2016. And then LIU won their tournament. They only have 9 wins. So I'm going to be interested to see how LIU does against Pitt. If Pitt gets past the first round, I could see them actually having a deep tournament run. Like, Pitt has some pretty darn good players on their team. And they are led by Kayla Lund, who is just named the ACC Player of the Year. But it's not just her. Like, it's not just Kayla Lund just leading the way and basically hoping to have a deep playoff run. Like, they have other talented players such as I'm probably butchering her name, but it's pronounced Chinaza Day. Chinaza Ndi, and then they also have Zoe Faki, and then they have I forget her last name, but her first name is Sabrina. But Pitt has a lot of offensive firepower, and believe it or not, Pitt actually went 12-0 in the spring. They did not lose one match. They did have one close call as they almost lost to Duke, which if they had lost that one, that would have been, I wouldn't say it would be funny, but it would have been something that would have just said, huh? But Pitt going 12-0 really was impressive. They even took down a hot Florida State team, which I kind of figured they were going to do. But Pitt is also led by Valeria Vasquez Gomez in terms of getting kills. And like I said, Kayla Lund is just a force at the net. And then Kylie Levers and Lexis Akio is able to distribute the ball well. Like, the thing about Kylie Levers is that I believe she was the one that had a season-ending injury last season, and then Akio had to step up. So there's that. The thing that really concerns me for Pitt, however, is can they stay consistent? And I was right about Sabrina's last name. Her last name is Starks. And she actually leads the team in blocks, so she is a force at the net on offense and defense. But in terms of Pitt, I'm a little concerned for how far they could really go. It seems like every time high expectations are placed on Pitt, they wind up crumbling in the second round. I think this year will be the year Pitt gets out of the second round and into the Sweet 16. Why, dare you ask? Because if they get past LIU, which I'm sure they will, they'd face Utah. Now, Utah has not been the most consistent team out there. They really struggled against Washington. I know they still have that impressive sweep over Washington State, but Washington State's such a young team. You can't really give them too much credit for that. And then they had to go 5 sets with certain teams such as USC and Arizona State, both of which weren't really that great in terms of the Pac-12. So there's that. But I think for Pitt, this is probably their best chance ever because they want to send most of their seniors off with at least a big note. And it would not be fun to see players such as Kayla Lund, Kylie Levers, Chinaza Ndi, and all those other seniors going off on a sour note, and Zoe Faki, and Marija Popovic. Either way, you get what I mean. I think this senior class is pretty deep, and I think Pitt is playing some of its best volleyball. The problem, again, it's all about consistency, and they kind of have to face a very talented Minnesota team if they get to the Sweet 16. But in order to get to the Sweet 16, you gotta get past the round of 32, and then in order to get to the round of 32, you gotta get past round 1. Which I think Pitt can definitely do that, but that Utah-Pitt matchup is going to be very interesting. Especially with all the firepower Utah has, but I think Utah has been less consistent than most people expected. Remember, this was a Utah team that everyone picked to win the Pac-12, and then Utah kind of folded. The same can be said for Pitt, however. Pitt was actually selected to win the ACC, but unfortunately kind of folded after week 1. So there's that right there. So there's that for the Pitt-Utah matchup. San Diego versus Texas A&M Corpus Christian. Okay, that one kind of goes without saying. San Diego, despite them being really disappointing this year, I think can win that one. My only concern is that I don't think San Diego can have a deep NCAA tournament run. I know, they went 10-0 to start the season. They actually went 11-0 to start the season. Then they dropped, I think it was 4 out of their last 6. They lost to LMU in that second matchup. They lost twice to BYU, and then they lost to Pepperdine, which they were lucky to get that second win against Pepperdine, because if San Diego doesn't win that second matchup, BYU does not get the automatic bid to the playoffs or to the NCAA tournament, and then BYU has to basically be an at-large team, and they have to play in the first round. So, though I probably would have suspected that all West Coast Conference teams would have been in the first round, because I think UCLA would have been the 16 seed. That's too much bracketology, and I'm not going to cram everyone's brain with that much information. So there's that. So San Diego, I expect them beating Texas A&M, Corpus Christian. The rest of the way, I don't see San Diego going far, because if they get out of the first round, they have to face a Louisville team, which really has a lot of firepower. They have the coach of the year in their conference. They also have the freshman of the year. And I think Louisville is playing some pretty good volleyball. My only concern for Louisville is they haven't had too many chances of getting some stiff competition or a good number of competition. Yes, they actually went undefeated just like Pitt. However, one of their matches that they were supposed to face was against Notre Dame, which got postponed, which eventually got canceled due to a COVID outbreak within Notre Dame's program. So it would have been great to see that Louisville-Notre Dame Part 2 matchup. I really was heartbroken to see that matchup getting eventually canceled. It really sucks. And then the last matchup features Towson versus Dayton. Now, Towson has only played 6 matches, and they've won all 6. I find this hard to believe. Everyone will find that hard to believe, but their conference games they kind of got canceled. Most of their conference games got canceled, and then their tournament was basically a first round, second round, or semifinals, finals. So that's how Towson went 6-0 and is in the NCAA tournament. Dayton, on the other hand, won the ASUN Conference, and Ohio State is not the only team that's Ohio State's not the only Ohio team that's in the NCAA tournament. Dayton is as well, and I kind of forgot about Dayton. Dayton actually has a solid program. I think they're highly underrated. They kind of get a bad rap because their conference is not Power 5, but Dayton always is that team that appears in the NCAA tournament year in and year out. So to me, I think Dayton can definitely get out of their first round matchup against Towson, but against Washington, now Washington has a lot of firepower on their team. Samantha Drexel is a force to be reckoned with, and then they've also got other players, and they're led by LMA Powell, and to me, I think Washington's just too deep for Dayton, but you never know. So then, that's pretty much that for the upper right portion of the bracket. Now let's go to the bottom right portion of the bracket. So the first round matchups in the bottom right portion of the bracket are UCF versus High Point, Army versus Notre Dame, Western Kentucky versus Jackson State, and Illinois State versus UNLV. So UCF versus High Point, it's a battle between two conference champions. UCF actually won their AAC conference championship tournament, while High Point won their conference tournament. I actually am blanking on the tournament that they actually play in, but it is what it is. They play in the same. They play in the same conference as Winthrop. That's pretty much all I could tell you. Anyway, so UCF versus High Point. So UCF actually got a little bit of a head start in terms of the NCAA, or in terms of non-conference games. They actually could have gotten more non-conference games, but most of their games got canceled due to COVID and whatnot. But it is what it is for them. As for High Point, they've just played conference games for the most part. This one's an interesting matchup. I mean, I had a tough time picking, but if there's something I remember, it's that UCF has a great history of doing well in the NCAA tournament. And that's why I kind of had to pick UCF to get out of the first round. Do I think UCF can get out of the second round? I highly doubt it. If UCF does get out of the first round, they would play Purdue in the round of 32. And Purdue is a very good team. I know Purdue only has 2 seniors, but Purdue really, 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 really is good. And I think they're going to be a team to... I think Purdue is probably the dark horse to win it all. They have had... They're just coming off of a series sweep against Ohio State. I don't know if that's their most recent sweep, but those 2 wins over Ohio State are what's keeping them as a top 10 seed or a top 10 team. It's very impressive, if you ask me. I didn't think there was going to be too much of a answer for Ohio State other than Nebraska. Like, most of Ohio State's matches actually got canceled. Like, their matches against Nebraska Minnesota got canceled, and they didn't get to play Wisconsin. Wisconsin wasn't on their schedule to begin with, so there's that. But other than that, I have UCF beating High Point. I have no doubt in my mind, I have Notre Dame beating Army. Army has played only 8 matches. They've won 6 out of 8 of those matches, which I guess is pretty good, but it's not that impressive. My thing is for Notre Dame, and I'm going to go on a little bit of a irate here. Notre Dame was probably the most disrespected team in the NCAA tournament. Of all the 48 teams, Notre Dame is the most disrespected team. They were in the last 4 in. I don't understand why. They have a win over Louisville. They have a win over Pitt. They swept Georgia Tech. I get the fact that Notre Dame struggled immensely. Well, they didn't struggle immensely, but they struggled in the spring. They lost to North Carolina, which they probably shouldn't have, because North Carolina is pretty bad. And then they lost a 2-0 lead to Florida State. But Florida State was heavily improved compared to the spring. So to me, I think Notre Dame I personally don't think Notre Dame deserves to be in the last 4 in category. Like, I understand based on quantity number of wins, but they have some good quality wins, and they don't have too many losses. They only have 3 losses. Their one loss was to Pitt, their other loss was to North Carolina, and their other loss was to Florida State. It's not like Pitt, though, considering Pitt lost to Syracuse twice, which wound up belly flopping in ACC play, and then they lost to Louisville and the other team, Notre Dame. Now, here's the thing for Notre Dame I really feel bad about. Notre Dame, in my opinion, got jarred in terms of the ACC. They were unable to play that second matchup against Louisville due to COVID. Like, they actually scheduled the rematch against Louisville, and then, unfortunately, a COVID outbreak happened in the Notre Dame program, and that match was postponed, which eventually led it to being canceled. Now, that right there could have determined the ACC champion. If Notre Dame beats Louisville, Notre Dame gets into the NCAA tournament and is most likely the number 11 seed, and Louisville is probably playing in the first round. So, to me, I think Notre Dame was heavily disrespected. I don't think they're a last 4 in team. I think this is a team that is probably the most dangerous of all of the unranked teams. Like, you look at Notre Dame's path through the NCAA tournament. If they get out of the first round, which I suspect they do, I can actually see them beating Oregon. Now, Oregon has also heavily improved. Oregon's 14 wins ties the number of Pac-12 conference wins in a season for the Ducks, which is very impressive by them. And Oregon's turnaround story is great. They went from missing the NCAA tournament to making it to the NCAA tournament. And for those that don't remember, Oregon lost 3 transfers to Hawaii last season, and it was just a season of unknowns for the Ducks. Now they're back in the NCAA tournament, and they actually earned a number 10 seed, which, again, I find a little strange. But Oregon does not have too many bad losses. Their losses are to UCLA, which they're better than what most people say, even though they have they have some bad losses. Washington State, which is a young team, but that was the first week of the season. Washington has been very good. And then their last and fourth loss of the season was to Arizona State, which was last weekend. Now, I don't know what happened in that last matchup against Oregon versus Arizona State, but that kind of has me doubting the Ducks. Oregon has a very young team. I believe they have only one senior this year. Matter of fact, I am positive they have one senior. I don't have their roster in front of me, but I pretty much remember that they don't have too many seniors on this team. They basically have like juniors and sophomores. And that's kind of what has me iffy about the Ducks. Like, the Ducks are coming off of a 1-year NCAA absence in terms of making the NCAA tournament. Can they really go far in the NCAA tournament when it comes to like facing teams such as Notre Dame, Purdue, heck, even Kentucky and Western Kentucky, which I'll be talking about in a little bit. But I think Oregon is a little young. I think Oregon's youth could show in this tournament. Notre Dame is also young, but they at least have experience. Like, players like Charlie Nigo, Caroline Muth, and Zoe Nunez all have experience. Their only thing I'm going to question is their freshmen. Can their freshmen step up? Can Aubrey Miller, Lindsay Hamilton, and Hattie Monson step up in their freshman roles? I personally think they can. And another reason for that is because that Notre Dame has Hannah Thompson, who is, I believe she's only one of 2 seniors on Notre Dame. And to me, I think that could be the difference maker. Like, Hannah, despite her being undersized as a middle blocker, really brings a whole lot of senior leadership to the Fighting Irish. And I think that could be the difference between Notre Dame making it out of the round of 32 and Notre Dame just barely losing to Oregon. But I think Notre Dame is probably the most dangerous team that's not ranked in this bracket. Or at least one of them. The other team that's not dangerous, or the other team that's dangerous and that's unranked or unseeded is Western Kentucky. Now, Western Kentucky faces Jackson State, which Jackson State's undefeated at 11-0, and Western Kentucky is undefeated at 21-0. The thing about Western Kentucky is that they've been ranked throughout most of... Matter of fact, they have been ranked all of the NCAA women's volleyball season. And the thing that really makes Western Kentucky unique is that they are one of the few Power 5... They're one of the few non-Power 5 conference teams that were ranked in the top 25. And to me, I think the Hilltoppers have a decent shot at getting to the Sweet 16. I think Western Kentucky gets out of their first round matchup against Jackson State. And then their second round matchup includes facing Washington State. Now, like I said about Washington State has a young team. I don't think they have I remember they have one senior, and I don't think she starts. Everyone else is basically underclassmen. They're either juniors or sophomores or heck even freshmen. If Western Kentucky gets out of that first round, I like their chances against Washington State. Now, Washington State has had a good amount of their matches canceled due to COVID. Their series against Stanford canceled to COVID within the Stanford program. And also Stanford didn't have enough players to play. Their matchup against USC canceled because of COVID within the USC program. Their matchup against Washington, the Apple Cup, was canceled because I believe it was actually because of COVID within the Washington State program. And then one of their matchups against Utah also got canceled because of the COVID protocols and how Washington State had a quarantine. So there's that right there. To me, I think Washington State also struggled against Utah, which if Washington State had beaten Utah, I think they would have definitely won the Pac-12, and also Washington State I'd be a little bit more confident in the Cougars, but I think Washington State's going to have a little bit of trouble. Their youth is really going to show in this tournament, and against a team such as Western Kentucky, they're really going to need to bring their A game because the Hilltoppers are no joke. If you're being ranked all season long and you're not in a Power 5 conference, you're doing something right. And that's why I have lots of respect for non-Power 5 conference teams. which it's pretty darn impressive, especially for this year, which you haven't been able to have too many non-conference games. And if you have, you're facing probably teams within your area and whatnot. So there's that. And then the last first-round matchup is between Illinois State and UNLV. So this one I had a little bit of trouble picking. I know UNLV plays in the Mountain West Conference, and I like UNLV's story. UNLV has made the NCAA tournament. This is basically going to be a running theme. UNLV made the NCAA tournament for the first time in God knows how long. And believe it or not, UNLV actually was able to go through like New Mexico State. Or was it New Mexico? Either way, it was one of those New Mexico schools, which... I'm sorry, not New Mexico. Colorado State. Colorado State has been the perennial juggernaut in the Mountain West Conference. But UNLV has stormed ahead, and they were able to topple Colorado State, and they were able to make the NCAA tournament. And this is actually UNLV's best start to their season. 12-0 is surprisingly their best start to the season, and I kind of find that hard to believe, but this is a pandemic year, and nothing is hard to believe. But I have Illinois State beating UNLV. I just think the quality in terms of the Mountain West Conference isn't that great, honestly. I think, to me, UNLV is going to have a rough go. And even if they get out of the first round, they have to face number 2 seed Kentucky. That right there is going to be a tough matchup right there. I personally think whoever faces Kentucky is going to need to bring their A game. Why? Because Kentucky has a lot of options. They have Madison Lilly, the SEC Player of the Year. And it's not just Madison Lilly. They have the Skinner girls, Avery and Maddie Skinner. They have one of the best liberos in the nation in Gabby Curry. And they've proven time after time that Kentucky belongs to the NCAA tournament, and they are the perennial powerhouse of the SEC. And it's tough to be a perennial powerhouse of a Power 5 conference. Unless, of course... Well, no, it really is tough, because you look at the ACC, it's basically a merry-go-round with, like, Pitt, Notre Dame, and Louisville. And then you look at the Pac-12, it's a merry-go-round with, like, Stanford. Well, Stanford just did not have a great year this year because of COVID and injuries piling up. But you also have other talented teams such as Washington, Utah, UCLA, Oregon, Washington State. Well, even though Washington State didn't play too many matches, but still, the Pac-12 is no joke. And then you look at the Big 12, it's basically just... Well, the Big 12 is kind of the lone exception. Texas is the lone powerhouse, and then Baylor is kind of the second banana. So there's that right there. And then the SEC is basically Florida and Kentucky. And Kentucky is more times than not the lone team that's basically on top of the SEC. And then you also have I talked about ACC, Big 12, and then you have the Big 10, which is the biggest merry-go-round ever. You have Wisconsin, you have Minnesota that's up there, Penn State, Nebraska. Like, those teams are basically perennial teams in the Big 10 and whatnot. So it's tough to be a perennial powerhouse in a Power 5 conference. And the fact that Kentucky has proven time after time that they can either at least place first or second in the SEC is absolutely amazing. And there are no easy matches in the SEC. I know this year was kind of the lone exception, but last year was kind of not, because they lost 2 matches to A&M and Georgia, which I'm pretty sure everyone will say that Kentucky should have won those matches. But they made up for it by winning the 2 matches that truly mattered, and that was against Florida, which wound up mattering because Kentucky got the higher seed than Florida, even though Florida got to the Sweet 16 while Kentucky got bounced 1 round earlier, I think. No, actually Kentucky and Florida both lost in the same round. Kentucky lost in 4 to Washington, and then Florida lost in 5 to Minnesota. So Never mind what I just said. But the fact of the matter is, it is tough to be a perennial powerhouse year in and year out in the SEC, especially when there are no easy matches. Like any other year, it would be so tough, especially with having to travel to like certain areas. Like if you have to travel to Florida, then you have to travel to Texas, then back to Kentucky, and whatnot, and so forth. And then you also have the trap matchups in the SEC. So there's that. But all in all, that's pretty much my little spiel on the NCAA tournament bracket right there. So I'm making a bold prediction when it comes to the NCAA tournament, NCAA women's volleyball bracket. Wisconsin wins it. Now, I know that's not really the biggest bold prediction right there, but I think Wisconsin takes it all. They have 8 seniors, and I believe all of them have All-American accolades, whether it's honorable mention or All-American first team. Like if there is going to be one year that Wisconsin wins in women's volleyball, this has to be the year. Wisconsin has to be the team that wins the NCAA tournament. They have not won an NCAA tournament championship this year, and it's unfortunate for them. But this year is their year. They have all sorts of talented players like Sydney Hilly, Dana Redkey, just to name a few, and the list goes on and on. I could probably write a book on how talented Wisconsin is, but I probably won't because it would take up the entire show, and we just can't have that. So, so there's that right there. And I definitely think Wisconsin has the best chance I think they definitely have the best chance of winning it all. I can see them getting challenged. And one thing that does have me concerned is that Wisconsin didn't play a full schedule. They actually had a COVID outbreak after their matchup against Michigan State, where they had to postpone their season for 2 weeks, which means they were unable to play Nebraska, which was a matchup that they were definitely ready to go against, but they unfortunately got word of Michigan State's COVID outbreak, and then they just said, you know what, we don't want to risk it, so we're going to postpone the matchup against Nebraska. And then the week they were supposed to come back, they found out that their opponent, Northwestern, had a COVID outbreak, which unfortunately they actually had to not play that week as well. And then against Penn State in the final week of the NCAA women's volleyball season, Penn State had to cancel their series against Wisconsin due to COVID tracing and whatnot. So it really is a bummer that Wisconsin hasn't been able to have that full slate of games or those full slate of matches, especially some in the Big Ten, or especially them being in the Big Ten. But I can see Wisconsin definitely, with all the talent they have, I just find it hard to believe that they won't be able to win. Just because they have lots of players stepping up. It's rather funny, actually. I just don't see any sort of way they'd slip up in this point of the season. Just because I think they have a great correlation, and I think that this team is just they've been battle tested. I know this hasn't been a perfect year, but it's been a year where their players have stepped up, and if we're up to them, they definitely want to be on the court facing some of these tough teams. But again, Dana Redkey, Grace Sloberg, and even underclassmen such as Devin Robinson have been stepping up. And like I said, Sydney Hilly has been great in terms of the setter position. Lauren Barnes has been great in terms of the libero position. Like, Wisconsin basically is a full-strung band. And honestly, it's all about putting it all together. And I think Wisconsin, after falling short last year to Stanford, has what it takes to put it all together. So there's that right there for Wisconsin. Now, the unranked team to watch for, in my opinion, or the unranked teams that I have making it to the Sweet 16 are Pitt, Notre Dame, and Western Kentucky. Other than that, I don't have any other teams making it to any other unseeded teams that will be making it to the Sweet 16. Now, for my dark horse teams include Purdue, Texas, Washington, and UCLA. Now, UCLA is an interesting story. They fell just short of receiving a first-round bye, and I think many can argue that they deserve it, but they have too many inconsistencies. They do, however, have the human wrecking ball that is Mac May, and I think that is going to help them so much. If UCLA gets out of that first round, I honestly could see them doing big things against BYU, because the thing about BYU is that BYU has such a young team. They have 2 seniors and 2 juniors. Everyone else is a sophomore or a freshman. UCLA, at least, even though they have 2 seniors, or they're going to be losing 2 seniors, I think has what it takes because they have talent such as Mac May. I don't know the whereabouts of Devin Chang, but their other 2 setters have been stepping up. And then Zoe Fleck has been impressive at the libero position. That's also been a merry-go-round as well due to COVID. But UCLA, I think, has a good shot. They are on the path of Wisconsin, and as we know from last year, UCLA lost to Wisconsin, but I think UCLA would kill to face Wisconsin a second time. So, and also, UCLA has had some decent wins, honestly. They have had wins over teams like Utah, Washington, Oregon, and Washington State. The problem is that they just split most of their series matchups against teams like those 4 I just mentioned, and then they split against USC, and then they also split against Colorado, which, well, those 2 I just mentioned are pretty unacceptable. Ohio State is also the interesting team of the tournament. I think they're a dark horse just because Ohio State didn't get any love to start out. Then they strung together a whole bunch of wins. And then they beat Penn State twice in one season. And then they beat Nebraska. And it would have been great to see them face Minnesota. Their only 2 not-so-good losses were Purdue. And they also had that one reverse sweep loss against Nebraska. But they played at Nebraska, so there's that right there. But Ohio State, if they get to the Elite 8 and they face Wisconsin, that's going to be a fun matchup. It's going to be the Big Ten matchup that no one got to see this year. So there's that. And I also forgot to mention this team, but Rice would be a very interesting team to see in the Elite 8. If they get past their first round matchup, and if they get past North Carolina A&T, and they get past Penn State, and then Texas gets past their matchups against the winner of Wright State and Samford, I'd love to see Rice versus Texas round 2. It obviously would not be in Texas. It would be in Omaha because there's no such thing as home court advantage. For this year, of course. But Rice versus Texas would be a really good matchup. It would basically be Texas's House of Horrors versus Rice's True Test. This would basically be the one or the other thing. Can Texas get past Rice? Can Texas actually have a deep NCAA tournament run? Because their last year was a disappointment. They lost in the Sweet 16. And then this year when they lost to Rice, which I honestly did not expect them losing to Rice. I honestly think they looked ahead when it came to playing the Rice. I think they looked ahead from that match against Rice all the way to BYU, which was unacceptable. I believe that matchup against Rice was on a Monday, and then the matchup against Baylor was, I believe, was on a Thursday or Friday. I'm not sure, but either way, Rice would be a very interesting team to make it to the Elite 8. And then Texas, while I did kind of bash them, I think that Texas does have a really good chance. They have a lot of great players like Logan Eggleston. They have Asia O'Neal. They have Jenna Gabriel. I think their problem could be their libero position. But honestly, I think that Texas doesn't have too many flaws. They just need to play their cards right. And their coach needs to actually not think with his head. Or he needs to start thinking with his head and not with his you-know-what. So there's that. It'd also be pretty cool to see Baylor into the Elite Eight, but they got to face a Nebraska team. And before then, they have to face either UMBC or Pepperdine, which if they face Pepperdine, that'll be the second time the Bears and the Waves will meet, as Baylor was able to defeat Pepperdine in a non-conference match in 5 sets, which you gotta give credit for Pepperdine for trying, though. So there's that. And then another team that would be a dark horse would be Purdue. Now, I said Purdue and Notre Dame, but I'll say Purdue just because I think despite only having 2 seniors and a mixture of juniors, sophomores, and freshmen, I think Purdue really poses a threat. They have a lot of good players, like Grace Cleveland, Maddie Bush. I forget the player that leads them in kills, but either way, you get what I mean. Purdue has been battle tested. They don't have too many standout wins. However, most of their losses were to like really good teams, such as Minnesota, Wisconsin, Penn State. Their standout wins include their 2 wins against Ohio State, and then they also have a win over Penn State, which is also impressive. So either way, Purdue is also definitely a team to watch for. Notre Dame is also included in that, just because Notre Dame has a lot of options offensively, and their defense isn't anywhere near bad either. My only problem is, can Notre Dame be consistent? Have they gotten their bad losses out of the way? Can they actually make it out of the Sweet 16 and into the Elite 8, where they'll face a very tough Kentucky team? Most likely. You never know, though. But for me, I think Notre Dame has to be consistent. If they're not consistent, then they're going to lose. They're going to be out. It sounds cliche, but Notre Dame losing to North Carolina and Florida State really has me a little concerned. But I think they can overcome that. I think those losses were just blips on the radar. Like, both those losses were in 5 sets, and then that loss to Pitt, they kind of lost on their home court, but they have made up for it considering they have some other standout wins. And I think, and if it were up to me, I'd like to see Notre Dame and Louisville in the same region. Unfortunately, that is not the case. They put Louisville and Pitt in the same region, which it really sucks, but it is what it is. So there's that right there. But that's going to pretty much do it for the NCAA Women's Volleyball Tournament. And yeah, I have Wisconsin winning it all. And I'll be posting my bracket on the Set Point Twitter account. So for those that are interested, I will be posting that. You can follow Set Point on Twitter at set_pointie. And you can follow that on Twitter, and that's where it's going to be at. So, actually going to take ourselves another break. When we come back, we will have some talk about the NCAA men's volleyball portion of the show, and we'll also have some NCAA beach volleyball talk. And we have that special little surprise, so don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this. You're listening to Set Point here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports. We'll be right back after a word from these messages.
Hey sports fans, do you like wine? Well, we've got the show for you. This is Let's Wine About Sports, a show where we talk about wine and sports simultaneously. From the classic Cabernet Sauvignon all the way down to the grapes that you've never even heard of before. Oh yeah, we cover it all. And we'll talk about a little bit of sports as well. Football, hockey, collegiate, women's sports, it doesn't matter. We're going to talk about it all, and we're going to whine about it all. So join me Monday at 8 p.m. on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports.
What's going on, football fans? This is me, your boy Larry, inviting you to join myself, Colin Reynolds, Mike Pat, and John Felipe for one of the most electrifying football shows you have ever heard. 3 and Out, right here at IE Sports Radio. Recap of the week before, a preview of what's to come, and of course, 3 hardcore head-to-head prime-time face-offs each week. You don't want to miss it.
And we are back with Set Point. We are in segment 2 of Set Point. You can definitely check out all those amazing shows, such as Let's Whine About Sports, every Sunday at 6 p.m. Pacific Time, 9 p.m. Eastern Time. 3 and Out, which is our seasonal show, which talks about football. And you can also check out Gloves Off and Bases Loaded as well. So, shout out to Larry B, who just popped in the chat room as soon as I was talking about 3 and Out. So, I appreciate it, man, and thanks for tuning in. And, unfortunately, I did talk about most of the tournament, but I will say this, my pick for the NCAA tournament is Wisconsin, and they're going to win it all, and it's going to be fun times. So, before we continue on to the second segment of Set Point, we gotta get the sponsor out of the way, such as Legacy Financial, the official sponsor of IE Sports Radio. 2020 was indeed a tough year. However, staying positive, keeping your faith, and continuing to work hard is the goal. If you're ever in a financial struggle at the moment, you're doing well and you want to get to the next level, or you're looking for a new opportunity to work for yourself and earn more money part-time, give IO a call at 510-928-2104. That number again is 510-928-2104 to book your appointment today. IO and her husband Andrew are just 2 people on a mission to help families build a legacy, as everyone in this world needs a legacy. And those 2 do an amazing job when it comes to financial support. I've talked with them and they've really changed my life and they've opened my eyes, which is absolutely amazing. You can follow Legacy Financial on Twitter at legacy_uncut, and you can follow them on Instagram at sims_uncut. So, thank you to Legacy Financial for being the official sponsor of IE Sports Radio, and thank you for help keeping the lights on. So before we continue on to segment 2 of Set Point, this week is 90s week when it comes to IE Sports Radio, and I've been putting off this surprise for a while, but it is high time we hop in Teran's time travel machine, and we look at the past NCAA champions in men's and women's volleyball. We'll start with the women just because it's always ladies first, and the NCAA women's volleyball tournament is basically here. So, back in 1990, we had UCLA winning the NCAA championship, knocking off Pacific in 3 sets. UCLA that year went 36-1. Actually, I won't be reading off the records. Just you'll see. So then in 1991, UCLA repeated as champions under Andy Banikowski, defeating Long Beach State in 5 sets. The game was actually held at UCLA, and UCLA beat Pacific in 1990 in Maryland. And then in 91, UCLA beat Long Beach State at UCLA. That's not fair to have home court advantage. I mean, anyway. So, and Larry says Long Beach State in 91, and I don't know what that means, but UCLA, according to what I'm reading, UCLA won the NCAA championship in 91. So, in 92, we had Stanford knocking off UCLA in 4 sets. They were coached by Don Shaw. That was the beginning of what was about to be a dynasty for Stanford, as Stanford defeated UCLA at New Mexico, and they were head coached by Don Shaw. Now, in 1993, Long Beach State was able to win an NCAA championship. It was actually their second NCAA championship, as they won one back in the 80s, as they knocked off Penn State in 4 sets at Wisconsin. Long Beach State then the 49ers was coached by Brian Gimellaro. And Larry says Long Beach State was in 91. I'll be getting to that in a little bit. I think I know what Larry's talking about, but this is the women's side. And so there's that. So anyway, yeah, Long Beach State won the NCAA Women's Volleyball Championship in 93. In 1994, Stanford rose back to its power, and they were able to defeat UCLA in 4 sets. Don Shaw was the head coach, and Stanford beat UCLA at Texas, at the University of Texas. And then in 1995, Nebraska rose to its power, and they were able to defeat Texas, the runner-up, in 4 sets. Nebraska was coached by Terry Pettit, and they won that in Massachusetts. And it's all good, Larry. I forgive you, buddy. I probably should have been a little bit more clear, but it is all good in the hood. But yeah, this is for the women's women's volleyball championships, and Nebraska beat Texas in 4 sets back in 1995. In 1996, we had Stanford, who was still under the head coaching eye of Don Shaw, knocking off Hawaii in 3 sets, winning at Cleveland State, as Stanford continued its dominance for the most part. And then Stanford followed up their 1996 championship with the 1997 championship, defeating Penn State in 5 sets, winning at Washington State, as the Cardinal defeated Penn State in 5 sets, and Don Shaw won his 4th NCAA championship in that decade. That actually wound up being the last, and actually, to be honest, when it comes to Stanford, Stanford was the best team in that decade. Stanford was just absolutely poggers when it came to that decade. And honestly, I think Stanford was probably was a dynasty that year. And was a dynasty in that decade, but they were also a dynasty going forward, because they now have the most NCAA women's volleyball championships in the present day. So anyway, yeah, Stanford won the NCAA championship in 1997, their second of a back-to-back. Now, in 1998, Long Beach State was able to knock off Penn State in 5 sets at the University of Wisconsin. The 49ers, or then 49ers, were coached by Brian Gimellaro, and honestly, that Long Beach State team is very significant, which I'll be getting into in a little bit. So, Penn State had lost 2 NCAA championships in a row. Both of them were in 5 sets. However, 1999 was the year Penn State finally broke through, as they won an NCAA championship under Russ Rose, sweeping Stanford at the University of Hawaii. Penn State finally broke through after they lost 2 NCAA championship finals in a row. So that was good for Russ Rose. Now back to Long Beach State. The thing that was very significant about Long Beach State's NCAA championship back in 1998 was that Long Beach State was the only undefeated team in that decade. Everyone else at least lost once. UCLA didn't go undefeated, Stanford didn't go undefeated, Nebraska didn't go undefeated, and Penn State did not go undefeated. Long Beach State was the only team that decade that finished with a perfect record. They finished 36-0 under Brian Gimellaro, and they were able to outlast Penn State in 5 sets, winning the NCAA championship at Wisconsin. So that's pretty much that for the NCAA women's volleyball teams, and that 98 team kind of holds a special place in my heart because they were led by Misty May Traynor, who went to my high school in Newport Harbor High School, and she is pretty much the face of Newport Harbor volleyball on the girls' side. So there's that. Now let's jump to the men's side. So the men's side is kind of going to be the same, and here's where I think Larry was referring to Long Beach State being in 91. So back in 1990, USC's men's volleyball team won the NCAA championship, defeating Long Beach State in 4 sets. The Trojans were led by Jim McLaughlin. And yes, Long Beach State has won something in terms of men's volleyball. So I don't want to hear people saying, oh, Long Beach State's a basketball school or a football school. No, they've won stuff in women's volleyball and in men's volleyball. Now, in 1991, this is probably what Larry was referring to. Long Beach State was able to defeat USC, getting revenge on the Trojans, beating them in 4 sets, as Long Beach State was coached by Ray Rattel. Back in 1990, USC won their championship at George Mason. In 1991, Long Beach State won at the University of Hawaii, aka Stan Sheriff Center. So there's that right there. And that was good for Long Beach State. They kind of put themselves back on the map, and they kind of made themselves known for being a men's volleyball school. In 1992, Pepperdine was able to win an NCAA men's volleyball championship, knocking off Stanford in straight sets at Ball State. Marv Dunphy was the head coach of Pepperdine men's volleyball at the time, and there you go. And there you go right there. Now, 93 to 1998 was a dominating time for this one team. UCLA, under the head coach of Al Skates, started their dominance when it comes to making and winning the NCAA men's volleyball championship. UCLA won the NCAA men's volleyball championship in 1993, sweeping Cal State Northridge at UCLA. The coach for the Bruins at the time was Al Skates, who turned UCLA into a dynasty during that decade. In 1994, Penn State was the one that won the NCAA men's volleyball championship, knocking off UCLA in 5 states at Purdue of Fort Wayne. The Nittany Lions were head coached by Tom Peterson. In 1995, UCLA, under the head coach of Al Skates, was able to get revenge against Penn State and sweep the Nittany Lions in Springfield, Massachusetts. And UCLA followed up their 1995 NCAA men's volleyball championship with another championship, winning under the watchful eye of Al Skates against Hawaii in 5 sets in the national championship match at UCLA. So there's that right there. In 1997, Stanford was able to knock off UCLA in 5 sets at Ohio State, as the Cardinal was coached by Roonan Neves at the time. And it's quite sad having to read off Stanford's name, because Stanford, unfortunately, is closing its program or shutting its program down due to money constraints. I still don't agree with that one bit. I really think Stanford's men's volleyball team should continue to thrive, because they've won 2 NCAA championships. And then I also can say the same for their other Stanford sports that are getting shut down. It really sucks, but and hopefully we will be able to see Stanford men's volleyball soon. But it really sucks seeing Stanford shut down 10 of its sports. Anyway, back to the NCAA men's volleyball championships. UCLA under Al Skates was able to get back on track in terms of winning NCAA championships as they swept Pepperdine at the University of Hawaii. UCLA was again coached by Al Skates, and like I said, UCLA was the dominant juggernaut of the 1990s. They made the NCAA championship six out of the 10 years in the 1990s. That's how impressive UCLA was. And Al Skates is probably like the Phil Jackson of men's volleyball, in my opinion. I know that could be sounding like a bit of a stretch, or maybe the Bill Belichick. Either way, it was quite amazing that Al Skates was able to put together a dynasty for UCLA. So there's that. And then in 1999, unfortunately for all UCLA fans, BYU, well, not unfortunately, UCLA did not make the NCAA men's volleyball championship. Instead, it was BYU winning the NCAA championship in 1999, defeating Long Beach State in 3 sets at UCLA. So there's that right there for BYU. They closed the year off with winning an NCAA championship to close the 1990s, which is cool in my opinion. And honestly, it's always good to have variety. I would have liked to have seen Long Beach State win the NCAA championship, but it would have been great for history purposes, but because I wasn't a Long Beach State fan back in the day, but it would have been great to see that happening. Either way, good job to BYU. So those are all of the team NCAA men's and women's volleyball champions back in the 1990s that have won the NCAA tournament. Notice how the Pac-12 teams, being Stanford and UCLA, were able to build dynasties. I mean, UCLA men's volleyball had the most impressive dynasty, considering they made the NCAA championship for 6 straight years. It's quite amazing. So, I don't know if we'll ever get that again, but who knows? Like, it would be cool if we did. Alright, so that's going to be that for the 90s portion of the show. We still have about like 25 minutes before we have to sign off. So let's jump to some NCAA men's volleyball action while we're at it. So the only noteworthy series in my eyes was Hawaii versus Long Beach State. So I'm just going to summarize the matches really quick. So the first set in the first match against Long Beach State and Hawaii, Long Beach State was able to snatch the first set out of Hawaii as they won the first set. I think it was like 26-24. And then the next 3 sets belonged to Hawaii as they responded really well. And even when Hawaii got pushed in that 4th set, it really showed Hawaii's grit and resolve because Hawaii is just that great of a team. Rado Parapanov is just a weapon of mass destruction. Nothing Long Beach State can do was able to slow him down. And then also Patrick Gaspin was a force in the middle as well. And then there were also some other standout heroes, as Chaz Galloway was a great option for Hawaii as well. Like, Long Beach, give credit to Long Beach State though. They did all that they could to try to slow down Hawaii's momentum, but Hawaii's all gas, no brakes momentum was just not breakable. And I think that's kind of what sets Hawaii apart from everyone. Like, Hawaii is on another level. Everyone else that's not BYU is on the same level. Everyone else is trying to catch Hawaii. Like, every team has been defeated at least once. Hawaii is the only team that has not lost a match this year. So, the second match was rather interesting. So, the first set kind of resembled the last set of the first match. Long Beach State won the first set, as they were able to come from behind and take the set from Hawaii. Now, in the second set, this was early in the second set. Everyone, get this. If you're still listening, y'all might want to sit up, and listen carefully. So, the second set, Long Beach State coach Alan Knipe was questioning on why everything was so loud, and this was actually because of the sound effects that Hawaii was displaying, as they had the Stan Sheriff Center cranked up to like really, really high. Like, if there were there were no fans in the Stan Sheriff Center. Let's get that out of the way. But if the Stan Sheriff Center was packed with if the Stan Sheriff Center had fans, it would have been super packed and it would have been super loud, kind of like in years past. So Alan Knipe was kind of questioning why everything was so loud, why the sound effects were really loud, and he actually questioned that to the referees. I'm not going to use the word complain because I don't think that's the right word to use, but he did go up to the referees or the head referee and say, hey, everything's too loud, we can't hear anything. And then he and Charlie Wade were kind of jawing at each other in terms of talking, and then eventually, I want to say Hawaii eventually turned down the sound effects, which, again, I kind of find that a little weird. It's like, I don't really think that's Alan's style. It's like, and I was confused of what was happening because I couldn't watch the bloody game. I was so disappointed. I would have liked to have watched this game, but unfortunately, I don't have Spectrum Sportsnet Hawaii or whatever the game was being broadcasted on. Either way, I think there was a live stream, but I was just too lazy to get it. Oh well. So, I was just so confused on what was happening. In the second set, Long Beach State was actually leading for the most part, and then Hawaii actually stole the second set. I think it was like 32-30, and that is what changed the momentum of that game. It wasn't the sound effects, it was Hawaii winning that second set. The third set, Hawaii just ran away with that third set for the most part. They trailed a little bit, but Hawaii was able to overwhelm Long Beach State. And then set 4, Long Beach State got the early jump, and then even though Hawaii was trying to keep it interesting, Long Beach State took the 4th set 25-20 and eventually went 5 sets. And that was actually the first time since March of last year that Hawaii had to be pushed to a 5th set. No team this year has pushed Hawaii to a 5th set. No one. Like, the last time Hawaii went 5 sets was courtesy of BYU, and that was actually when Hawaii was down 2-0 and eventually had to rally back to win in 5 sets. So the 5th set, in short, Hawaii just ran away with that 5th set. Hawaii dominated that 5th set as Rado Paropanov was just a force at the net, and he was also a force at the service line. Something else that occurred in that match was that Colton Cowell, the libero of Hawaii, actually had to be taken out. I don't know if he got injured, but I'm sure he got injured because he doesn't get taken out unless something weird happens. So someone that stepped up was Brett Sheward, who really stepped up, and he's a guy I've actually seen play somewhat. Like, he definitely he's normally the setter, but / opposite sometimes, but he actually played libero, and Brett Sheward really stepped up. And honestly, I think he's kind of the unsung hero for Hawaii, and if it weren't for him, I don't know if Hawaii could have been undefeated. Sure, I don't want to say that, but I'm almost certain like Hawaii would have maybe somewhat struggled. But either way, I think Long Beach State gave it their all against Hawaii, but the problem is that they just could not hang with them. And that's partially because Long Beach State did not get a preseason, but also it's because Long Beach State has a young team. Like, their starting setter, Aiden Knipe, the son of Alan Knipe, he is only a freshman, and there's a lot of like underclassmen for Long Beach State. Like, they do have some upperclassmen such as Simone Anderson and Ethan Siegfried, and then Spencer Olivier is kind of up there. But honestly, Long Beach State is young for the most part. Like, they don't have the whatchamacallit, the TJ DeFalcos and the Josh Tuanigas that they've had in the past. So there's that right there. And to me, I think Hawaii just has all the firepower and whatnot. So I don't want to take anything away from the effort that Long Beach State gave, but I just think Hawaii is just on that whole other level. And it sucks that Long Beach State wasn't able to take a match off them. I actually had Long Beach State taking a match off them, but I guess I'm eating crow now. And I will say this about Long Beach State: they're very resilient. I'm not trying to take away Hawaii's credit, but Long Beach State having to push Hawaii to 5 sets is absolutely amazing. Like, if Long Beach State had gotten swept in one of their matches, I wouldn't have been too impressed, just because I wouldn't have been too impressed with Long Beach State, considering Hawaii has just been the dominant team. And Hawaii, it's tough to beat Hawaii at Hawaii, especially with lots of fans. And Colton Cowell is actually not the libero. He was actually one of the outside hitters. So he actually unfortunately was taken out. I presume it was injury and whatnot. So once again, Hawaii is still undefeated, and they're inching closer to that Big West Conference Championship. I don't know who else they have on the schedule. I want to say it's not like anyone of noteworthiness, just because they've already played Santa Barbara. They won both those matchups. They've played Long Beach State. Looking at the schedule, I have the schedule pulled up. They face Cal State Northridge this week, and then next week they're home again against UC Irvine, which Irvine has been disappointing considering they couldn't beat Long Beach State after they were up 2-0, and then they lost to CSUN. So unless Hawaii somehow loses or they somehow stop playing volleyball, I can see Hawaii winning the Big West Conference regular season championship. I can also see, even if Hawaii doesn't win the Big West Conference tournament, as long as they get to like the semis or the finals, most likely the finals, I can see Hawaii making the NCAA tournament. Like, this is probably the best team Hawaii has ever had, and honestly, I think Hawaii is going to really do some damage. I think there's only a few teams that could stand up to Hawaii. One of them is BYU, and then maybe the other one could be Long Beach State. But again, the Big West Conference tournament's going to be at Stan Sheriff Center, which, oh boy, like if Long Beach wasn't happy about playing at Stan Sheriff Center then or this past weekend, I don't think they're going to be happy having to play in terms of the Big West Conference tournament at Stan Sheriff Center. So there's that right there. That's going to do it for the NCAA men's volleyball portion of the show. I actually need to go over the NCAA men's volleyball coaches polls. I don't see a whole lot of point of going over the women's coaches poll just because it's NCAA tournament time and whatnot. So anyway, so the top 15 of the AVCA men's volleyball coaches polls. 15 through 11. 15 is UC Irvine. 14 is George Mason, 13 is McKendree, 12 is UC San Diego, and 11 is Loyola of Chicago. 10 through 8, 10 is NJIT, or New Jersey Institute of Technology, 9 is Grand Canyon, and 8 is Penn State. 7 through... tied for 6th is Long Beach State and UCLA, and then tied for 4th is Lewis and Pepperdine. I still don't understand how Lewis is still top 5. But anyway, top 3 when it comes to the AVCA men's volleyball coaches polls. Number 3 is UC Santa Barbara, surprisingly, even though they lost to Long Beach State. Number 2 is BYU, and then number 1 is Hawaii, which is no real surprise. Like, come on now. Now, that's pretty much it for the NCAA men's volleyball portion of the show. Now let's jump over to the NCAA beach volleyball portion of the show. Then I'll send you all on your way after I go over my little surprise with all of you. But anyway, so this past weekend was quite the unusual weekend. Lots of teams were beating lots of teams. Like, LSU and Florida State beat Long Beach State. They beat USC, which was the number 1 team in the nation. And it was quite surprising. I didn't even know what was going on until I saw... Because I was focused on the NCAA indoor women's volleyball portion of the season. But then I've been seeing USC losing, and I'm like, what? USC lost? And I'm just going to say this. The beach volleyball championship in Division I is wide open this year. I think there's only one division, though. But NCAA women's beach volleyball is wide open this year. So anyway, so the AVCA top 20 in terms of the beach volleyball polls, 20 through 16, 20 is Florida Gulf Coast, 19 is Georgia State, 18 is South Carolina, 17 is Stetson, and 16 is Long Beach State. 15 through 11, 15, Florida International, 14, Hawaii, 13, Florida Atlantic, 12, Arizona, and 11 is Cal. 10 through 7, 10 is Pepperdine, 9 is Grand Canyon. Tied for 7th is TCU and Stanford, and number 6, I forgot to mention 6, number 6 is Cal Poly. Stanford has been on a roll, by the way. They are on a hot streak. So 5 through 1. Number 5 is Loyola Marymount. Number 4 is LSU. Number 3 is Florida State. Number 2 is USC, which means we have a new number 1. And that new number 1 is UCLA, which is quite the surprise. Like, UCLA has only lost a couple matches this year, but the fact that they're the new number 1 team is quite amazing. Like, this just goes to show you that 1 through 4, heck, maybe even Loyola Marymount can be thrown in there, is wide open. Like, if those 4 make the NCAA semifinals, then anything can happen. Like, throw the records out, all those teams can beat anybody. And that's what's unique. And that's what I like about NCAA beach volleyball. It's tough to, like, focus on it considering you've got men's volleyball happening, and then you've got beach volleyball happening, and then you've got the women's indoor volleyball happening. But I will say this, it's really fun to see a sport that's wide open. Kind of like NCAA men's basketball, where Baylor wound up winning it all, despite being the number 2 team behind Gonzaga. And this isn't basketball I should be talking about. I should be talking about volleyball. But I will also make a point that everyone needs to remember that UCLA is still the reigning NCAA champion. I know 2020 there wasn't an NCAA tournament, but everyone still needs to remember UCLA was still the 2019 champion, and they are still, in theory, the reigning national champion. So don't be sleeping on the Bruins. So there's that for the NCAA beach portion of the show. I'd go through all the matchups, but I think that would just take too long, and in about 10 minutes I gotta go off the air. So that's gonna do it for this show today. We talked about a lot, such as the NCAA women's volleyball tournament. Oh, one more thing I gotta mention, and we're actually gonna jump to the high school scene. So before the show started, I actually saw two of the top teams in California duke it out against one another in terms of boys volleyball. The first team was Newport Harbor High, my alma mater, and then the second team was Miracosta. Miracosta was the runner-up of the CIF Southern Section Championship and the runner-up of the CIF SoCal Regionals, while Newport Harbor is theoretically the reigning national champion, as they won everything championship-wise back in 2019. Miracosta, however, was playing its first match, while Newport Harbor was playing its second match. Their season isn't even a full week old. In the end, Miracosta came out with the win as they swept Newport Harbor. The two teams will be facing each other in about a couple more weeks. This time it'll be at Newport Harbor High School. This was actually the first game that was being played at Miracosta's new gymnasium. I think it was like over $15 million in terms of renovation, and it looks really good. It looks like a college gymnasium. Like, I haven't been in the Miracosta gymnasium, but it looks really cool. But that's pretty much all I got in terms of high school boys volleyball. I won't be talking about that until probably the later part of the season. But that's going to do it for this episode of Set Point. One last thing before I sign off. Gotta get through this surprise. So next week, I will be having Emily Eman, our past guest of Set Point, on Set Point. And next week's show is actually going to be on Monday at 11 a.m. Pacific Time, which is 1 p.m. her time in Central Standard Time. And we're going to be talking about the NCAA tournament because this week she is going to be covering, not this week. Next week she's going to be covering the NCAA tournament for the Big 10 teams, and that's going to be really awesome that she's going to get the chance of doing that, because remember, she's got the Big 10 Volley Talk podcast going on, and it's really going to be a fun time for she and I talking about the NCAA tournament, and most likely talking about the Big 10 teams, which obviously she is an expert of, and I'm sure she's got more knowledge than I do. I'm 100% certain of it. But that is going to do it for this week's episode. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you to Marcus, who says, "Great show, brother." Hey, I appreciate you, man. And in less than 10 minutes, Marcus Los Great will be going on with gloves off. So it is that time, everybody. It's time to drop the beat. Because I got to dip because, first of all, it's dinner time. Second of all, Marcus is about to go live. And third, I'm about to dip like a banana in chocolate. You feel me? Thank you all for tuning in to Set Point. If you're listening live, I really appreciate it. Shout out to the chat room, Davidson Crooks, Larry B, and Marcus Los Great, my brother. Shout out to everyone else that was listening live, and shout out to those that are listening back on the playback. If you're listening in podcast form, I definitely do appreciate it. And I will be seeing you all Friday for the SoCal Supreme Sports Show, and then Set Point, once again, will be coming at you on Monday at 11 a.m. Pacific Time, 2 p.m. Eastern Time, 1 p.m. Central Time, with Emily Eman, my guest. For everyone here at IE Sports Radio, this is Teran Rodriguez signing off. Have yourselves a great rest of the week, And in 8 days, we've got some NCAA women's volleyball tournament action. Have a great week, everybody.